Hello everyone, my name is Preston Paris and today I'm going to be talking about the state of the Iran war. And so since February 28th, 2026, which marks almost 5 months up until this point, the US and Israel have been at war with Iran. And so the conflicts in the Middle East with regards to Israel have lasted for decades at this point, and I'm not going to go into all the details there, but the United States has recently gotten intensively involved with the conflict, starting with last year. And so we have Operation Midnight Hammer that gets launched against Iran. And that is the operation where you have the B 2 bombers flying in and they bomb Iranian nuclear facilities. The emerging narrative was that Iran can't have a nuclear weapon. They've been enriching uranium and things of that nature, except that the Iran deal that Obama, of all people, had negotiated and had in place was terminated by Trump. And then it led to Trump claiming that Iran couldn't enrich uranium, which didn't make sense, still doesn't make sense. And so now we get Operation Epic Fury, and tensions have devolved into full-scale war, and tensions are at almost an all-time high, what with Saudi Arabia launching airstrikes at an airport in Yemen, which is one of the most recent crucial developments. And so we're going to get into that today. So let's start with a bit of background. Iran has attacked several Gulf countries that are not a part of the Axis of Resistance. So Axis of Resistance would be Yemen, Lebanon, and Palestine, as well as other Islamic resistance groups. Whereas the Gulf countries that have engaged in diplomatic relations with the United States, being Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Bahrain, amongst others, have been hit by Iran in various points in this war. And so that leaves us with the following situation where Iran is defending themselves. And by defending themselves, I mean Iran is launching missiles constantly at the Gulf countries, but also Israel. And within those Gulf countries, the sites being hit are these U.S. military bases. You had an embassy getting hit in, I believe, UAE, and that was a disaster. And so Iran just gets the almost luxury of just launching these missiles, right? And it's up to the United States and Israel to utilize missile interceptors to prevent serious damage from being done. Now, obviously, the host countries receiving these strikes, the Saudi Arabias, the Bahrains, they have their missile interceptors, but it's costly to stop missiles, right? And so amidst all this conflict, you have midterm elections coming up in 2026. Now, Trump has made claims about various topics like deportations, stating that he doesn't want to conduct things like that if they're domestically unpopular, because he doesn't want to expend the political capital or, sour the view of the Republican Party. But this war is very different. This war is obviously very unpopular. Trump's approval rating is 40% and below, heavily due to this conflict. Trump ran on a no new wars platform, and he's gone and he started a war, not only any war, but a Middle Eastern war, which is well known to go on for a long time if it isn't well managed, which this one obviously isn't. But also, Israel is facing, and should I say, Netanyahu is facing a lot of domestic pressure, but he's on the opposite end of the coin. He's running for re-election soon, and in Israel, the overwhelming sentiment is that this war needs to keep going because it's not just about Iran, it's about Palestine, it's about Lebanon also, right? And these countries aren't viewed as extraneous overseas conflict like they are here. They're viewed as countries that pose a huge national security risk. That's why Israel always talks about how Iran is on the cusp of, develop a nuclear weapon that is extremely dangerous and detrimental to them, right? There's all these talks about how these Islamic countries pose varying degrees of threats to Israel because there is a genuine national security risk in the country with regards to these countries, right? I have no doubt in my mind, God forbid, but if Iran did complete the development of a nuclear weapon and they launched it, there's a 100% chance it would be at Israel. Now, with regards to the United States, there's this narrative, particularly on the right, to say that, Iran in particular doesn't, or it does pose a huge security risk to the United States. Now, if you forget the chronological order of events and you just see the attacks on these Gulf countries and on the military bases, you might believe that narrative, but such isn't the case, right? These are retaliatory strikes being launched by Iran, and it really isn't in the United States' best interest to continue prosecuting this war. It's a huge waste of money. I'm sure if you have a vehicle or you've just been paying attention at all, gas prices are extremely volatile and very costly, even though Trump, again, ran on things that were completely antithetical to this. He ran on no new wars. He ran on, getting the inflation under control, which when you launch a war, obviously doesn't happen, right? And so this is the situation we're in. It's not great at all. It's actually a very bad situation. Furthermore, there's a lot of geopolitical and geographical elements to this war that are very important to mention. I'm sure if you've been watching the news, you've heard about the Strait of Hormuz, which is an outflow from the Persian Gulf. I had to check my notes to make sure I got that right. It's an outflow of the Persian Gulf, right? And the way the geography works is Iran borders the Gulf and controls the Strait of Hormuz. And because they are getting a war waged against them by the United States of Israel, they have decided to close it. Now, it's not a close in the sense that, you send in some gates, you form a border with a line of ships or anything like that, but commercial ships that are passing through the strait and are not complying with Iran's demands, be it paying a tax or whatever it is, they're getting attacked. And the Strait of Hormuz is a very important global choke point when it comes to importing and exporting oil. And so that's why gas prices go up when a strait like that is closed, meaning blockaded. The United States has done this extra naval blockade also because a lot of the oil that flows in and out of the strait is Saudi Arabian in nature and heavily affects the Middle East. And so there's increased pressure there on Iran, on these countries to stop the war, right? There was rumors not too long ago that there was going to be a ground invasion prosecuted by these allied Gulf countries. Now, it fell through, but it shows that the United States is trying to put pressure in a variety of different ways to try and end this conflict, albeit unsuccessfully. And so there's also worth mentioning the Red Sea. Now, there are pressure on the Houthis, which are a Yemeni military group, and they could close the Red Sea via the Bab el-Mandeb, and that would put increased pressure on the United States and Israel. Now, that hasn't happened yet, but that is also an option being weighed. Lebanon and Israel have been engaged in a war as well. So Israel is launching a war on multiple fronts. There's obviously the Israel-Palestine conflict, which has been going on since 2023, what with October 7th, a large-scale attack on Israel that shook up the entire region and really the entire world. And then you have war against Lebanon, which there's an entire section of Lebanon that is controlled by the Houthis. And then you have war against Yemen, or not war against Yemen, war against Iran, I meant. But Yemeni groups are also part of the axis of resistance. And so diplomacy is being hosted by Pakistan, Qatar, and the United States. Diplomatic efforts have been very topsy-turvy, to say the least. There was an MOU that was implemented June 21st, I believe it was. But that MOU has completely deteriorated, and like I said, what with the Saudi Arabian airstrike that was launched, it looks like the conflict is devolving even further. The Trump administration have been a central part of this conflict, and not in a good way, right? As I mentioned, the MOU, the Memorandum of Understanding, that's not even a peace deal, by the way, right? That is a memorandum, and it explains that, the countries involved understand what they need to do to secure a real peace deal. And so it's the precursor of the peace deal has fallen through. And that shows that the conflict is essentially nowhere near over, which is quite poor in terms of progressing towards an end to the conflict. Trump and the administration are always peddling these talking points that go along the lines of Trump or Iran always wants to make a deal. Iran really wants to make a deal. They want to make a deal so badly. And that's just not true. There was the initial point that Iran couldn't have a nuclear weapon, and then it turned into Iran can't enrich uranium, which is a completely different requirement from Iran, one which they are absolutely not going to comply with, because Israel is a key adversary to them, and Israel is well known to have nuclear weapons under the table. So if Israel has nuclear weapons and Iran is being told that they can't even enrich uranium at all, let alone have a nuclear weapon, that puts what they deem to be unfair pressure on them. And so they obviously kept enriching uranium, and it led to Operation Midnight Hammer and then Operation Epic Fury, which is what's continuing the conflict now, right? The Strait of Hormuz is another talking point. One day it's open, one day it's closed, one day it's open, one day it's closed. It's de facto closed, right? Iran still controls the Strait of Hormuz. That's not being contested anytime soon. And any safety hazard that is posed to commercial vessels in the region or in the waters is going to prevent companies from sending vessels through the water, right? So in essence, it's closed. Trump insists that it's open, insists that it's going to be open, but it doesn't look like that's happening anytime soon. And you have these various, I don't even know how to describe them properly. These bizarre moments like the Netanyahu phone call, right? For those who aren't in the know, Trump aired out this phone call, this abrasive phone call that he has with Netanyahu, and he talks about the elephant in the room, which is that the United States is waging this war at the behest of Israel. Some people disagree with that assessment. I heavily agree that the United States is doing this for Israel. That's what Trump has said. I believe he said it explicitly at this point, but he's tacitly implied it on several occasions. And Trump does this to try and put pressure in Israel to very little avail, right? And so there's very poor diplomacy and strategizing on display uh, with regards to this conflict, and that is partly why it's still going on. Again, as I said, the conflict isn't slowing down. The ball is 100% in Israel's court when it comes to stopping the Iran war. If Israel wants to stop the war and focus on Netanyahu's re-election bid, which kind of doesn't help him, if I'm being honest, but if they ever did want to stop the war would end. Everyone would come to the table. They'd go to Islamabad, Pakistan, and they'd negotiate the end to this conflict. But that hasn't happened because Israel would like for this war to continue. They have a vision which entails defeating a lot of these bigger regional powers, not Saudi Arabia, for example, because that's not going to happen. But a huge Middle Eastern power like Iran getting defeated, getting completely roiled in every shape or form only benefits Israel to become a bigger power, both geographically but also economically in that region. And so, with regards to U.S. involvement, you have Vance recently going on Joe Rogan, making a very piss poor, in my opinion, appearance on one of the biggest podcasts in the entire world. Vance being a front runner for the Republican Party in the 2028 presidential election. Still ways out, but he makes that appearance. He gets asked point blank about Israel with follow-up, and he can't even answer straight whether Israel affects the United States or influences the United States in a significant way. He talked about how Israel influenced the United States and talked about Israel sabotaging diplomacy, which is well known, but can't emphasize his position and state his position plainly. And that shows that, excuse my language, he's full of shit. I'll say that now. I have said it privately, but I'm not going to be voting for J.D. Vance in 2028. It kind of doesn't matter what happens this point forward. I don't know him personally. I don't trust the guy at all. And so that just shows that he's completely untrustworthy. There was a House amendment attempted to be passed that would stop funding to Israel, because even though the Iran war in and of itself is already unpopular, the huge issue right now is that U.S. aid to Israel has gone on for a very long time, and people are fed up with that money being used for various horrible means, particularly against Palestine. But we get this once-in-a-lifetime bipartisan effort to shut down that amendment. The big headline was that 100 Democrats voted to stop the aid. This represents a big shakeup in the Democratic Party right now, what with the more left-leaning members wanting to stop funding Israel, whereas the establishment Democrats and the Democrats that are pro-Israel or just take money from AIPAC, which is a lot of them, are saying that the aid can continue forever. No surprise, but all the Republicans besides Thomas Massie, who has already lost his re-election bid, they all voted to keep sending aid to Israel because Republicans are very enthusiastic about the prospect of sending money to Israel. It's a big embarrassment to see for me personally as a conservative, but that just goes to show that Republicans are in quite bad shape right now with regards to foreign policy and all the neoconservative efforts that are being peddled not only by Trump, which is more than enough, but also by his Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, who's looking like a front runner for the 2028 election. On the Republican ticket, should I say. Now, there was an attempt to use the 1973 War Powers Resolution, which is basically a congressional check on the executive branch to prevent U.S. troops being used. You've got to notify Congress as soon as you withdraw troops or or soon after, and you have to recall them, and I believe 60 to 90 days if you don't get congressional war approval. There was an attempt to pass a resolution that would invoke the War Powers Act, but it completely fell through because in order to do this, you need the power to enforce this, right? You need the power to stop the executive branch from launching war in Iran, which the Congress doesn't have. Congress doesn't have a paramilitary branch. We're not a Middle Eastern country in that way. And so that's where we're at now. There's obviously a lot more to talk about, and I look forward to providing you updates. But if you enjoyed today's video, I'd love if you guys smash the like button, hit subscribe. This was my first attempt at a monologue. This was actually my first full try, and so maybe I look at this footage and I completely scrap it, but I think I did okay, right? I covered a decent amount of talking points, right? But that's all I've got for you guys for now. Take care. God bless you all.